I'm Jake, 32, and I still don't fully understand what happened that day at my grandpa's birthday. It was supposed to be a simple, family-only thing, nothing fancy, just one of those Sunday afternoons where everyone shows up half-tired but pretending they aren't. I remember driving there feeling weirdly nervous, even though I had no reason to be. Grandpa turning 80 felt like a big deal, and I wanted to be present. You know, really present. When I walked into the house, everything smelled like his usual party combo: baked ham and way too much cinnamon. My mom was in the kitchen pretending she wasn't stressed, which is her default setting. My brother Mike was already there, cracking beers with my uncles like he owned the place. I tried to blend in and not make it obvious I hadn't been around much lately. Work had been chaotic, and honestly, I'd been avoiding the family more than I should admit. Still, when Grandpa saw me and smiled the way only he does, I felt that little punch of guilt behind my ribs. He hugged me longer than usual, like he knew something I didn't. Everyone kept saying how proud he was of me, but the tone felt off, almost rehearsed. I shrugged it off and tried to enjoy things. But even in those first minutes, something felt slightly tilted, like the day was setting up for something I couldn't name. I noticed people were talking around me, not to me. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't normal either. And there was this undercurrent I only started picking up on because I've always been the type who notices small shifts. I remember thinking maybe I was overreacting. Maybe everyone was just tired or hungry. But even then, I knew that wasn't it. It felt like walking into a movie halfway through and realizing everyone else already knows the twist. I tried to laugh, shake it off, act natural. But inside, something was already tightening, like the day was quietly rearranging itself around me. When it was time to sit down for food, Grandpa asked for something he always loved: story time. He liked when we shared old memories, made him feel like none of the years slipped away too fast. Usually I love this part, because Grandpa and I had a lot of good ones together. Fishing trips, late-night sandwiches he wasn't supposed to let me have, the time he let me drive his truck at 13. Stuff nobody else even knew about. So naturally, I thought we'd go there again. I sat down waiting for someone to bring me up in a story or for Grandpa to look at me and start one of his own. But instead, it was like I didn't exist. Mike started talking about when he helped Grandpa fix the fence last year. My cousins jumped in with their stories about sleepovers and road trips. My mom brought up moments from when they lived in the old house. And every time a story touched a timeline where I should have appeared, someone skipped over the part where I was involved. It wasn't subtle either. It was like watching someone erase pencil marks right in front of you. At first, I thought maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe they were telling whatever popped into their heads. But after the fourth or fifth story that should have included me and didn't, I started feeling this cold, sinking heaviness. Like I was being edited out. Nobody looked at me weird. Nobody avoided me physically. It was just the stories, every single one rewritten without me. I sat there smiling like an idiot, pretending I didn't notice. But it was impossible not to. It felt like someone had cut out pieces of my life with them and tossed them into the trash. I didn't want to make a scene, but my chest was tight. I kept glancing at Grandpa, waiting for him to jump in and correct someone. But he didn't. He just listened quietly, hands folded, eyes kind but distant, like he wasn't fully there. The weirdest moment happened when my aunt brought up the summer we all spent at the lake house. That summer was huge for me. My first time catching a fish by myself. The time Grandpa taught me how to tie proper knots. The day I fell off the dock and he laughed so hard he cried. But in her version, that summer barely had room for anyone except her kids and my brother. She talked about how Mike was practically glued to Grandpa's side, how he was the favorite that year. All these super specific details that didn't match anything I remembered. I waited for someone to jump in and say, Jake was there too, but nobody did. It was like the whole family had silently agreed to revise the past. I remember staring at the tablecloth, those faded blue flowers, and thinking, is this actually happening? At one point my cousin even described a moment where I knew I'd been standing right there, holding the flashlight for Grandpa while he fixed the generator. But in the story, Mike was holding the flashlight. I felt this strange buzzing in my ears, like my body was trying to alert me in some primal way. It wasn't anger. It was confusion mixed with something almost like grief. Grief for memories that suddenly didn't belong to me anymore. I tried telling myself I was reading too much into it, but my stomach knew better. My hands kept shaking every time I picked up my glass. And the part that really messed with me was how natural everyone seemed while doing it. Like they weren't even thinking about the fact that I should have been part of these moments. I kept glancing around, waiting for one person, just one, to lock eyes with me and acknowledge what was happening. But nobody did. Not even Grandpa. Right after dessert, things somehow got stranger. My mom pulled out this old photo album Grandpa kept tucked away, the one with the cracked leather cover. I knew that album. I'd seen those photos since I was a kid. And there were pictures in there, tons of them, of me and Grandpa. Fishing, messy birthday cakes, me riding that old red bike he fixed up for me. But when she opened it, page after page looked different. The photos I remembered weren't there. Some pages were completely reorganized. Pictures of moments I knew I'd lived had been replaced with other scenes or angles where I wasn't present. I flipped through so fast my fingers started shaking. At one point I even asked, "Did you guys redo this?" But nobody really answered. They just acted like the album had always been that way. Mike even joked, "You didn't come around much back then anyway," which wasn't true at all. My throat tightened because that line hit harder than it should have. I tried pointing out missing photos, but the reactions were so casual it made me feel insane. Aunt Linda said, "Maybe you're mixing things up," and kept flipping pages like none of it mattered. But I wasn't mixing anything up. I knew those pictures existed. I could describe them down to the color of the shirts we wore. And now they were gone. All the proof that Grandpa and I had been close, just gone. Like someone wanted it that way. Or like it had never happened at all. The last strange thing happened right before I left. Grandpa asked me to help him outside for a second, just to move some chairs back into the shed. I jumped at the chance, thinking maybe he would say something. Maybe he would acknowledge how weird everything had been. We walked slowly, the way he always did, his hand brushing the wall for balance. The backyard looked the same as always, except I felt like I was seeing it from a place I didn't belong to anymore. When we set the chairs down, he turned to me with this tired look in his eyes. It wasn't sad exactly, but it was distant. He said my name, softly, almost like he was testing if it still fit. I waited for the rest, for him to explain anything, absolutely anything. But he didn't. He just nodded once, like he'd said something deeper without actually saying it. And then he walked back inside before I could ask what the hell that meant. When I followed, everyone was already cleaning up, acting normal, laughing, rinsing dishes like the day hadn't twisted itself into knots. I stood there in the doorway feeling like the air was different around me. Nobody looked my way. Nobody asked if I was okay. It was like I'd slipped behind glass and couldn't get back through. I told them I had to head out, and a few people waved without turning. Grandpa didn't even come to the door. I drove home with this heaviness I still can't explain. And to this day, I can't figure out why it all happened the way it did, or why it felt like the whole family agreed to erase me at the exact same time. I barely slept that night. I kept replaying every moment in my head, wondering if I had missed some earlier sign that things were shifting. It didn't feel like normal family weirdness. It felt intentional, even though nobody acted like they were trying to hurt me. That's what messed with me the most. If they had been rude or aggressive, I could have explained it. But erasing someone is different. It's quiet, subtle, and somehow heavier. The next morning, I called my mom just to see if her tone changed. She sounded perfectly normal, chatting about leftovers and how tired Grandpa got after everyone left. I tried bringing up the stories and the album, just lightly, not accusing anything. But she brushed it off like I was overthinking everything again. She used that exact word, again. It hit me like a punch, because I didn't think I had a history of imagining things. She said everyone was just sharing what they remembered, nothing more. But that explanation didn't land right. There's a difference between forgetting details and removing someone entirely. I hung up feeling even more unsettled. It felt like she knew what I was talking about, but didn't want to go near it. And that silence alone told me more than anything she could have said out loud. The rest of the day, I tried distracting myself with work and errands. But everything felt slightly off, like my body was still reacting to something my brain hadn't processed. Every time I closed my eyes, scenes from the party replayed, but in both versions, mine and theirs. Two timelines overlapping, but not matching. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been pushed out of one of them without warning. Later that week, I stopped by Grandpa's place alone, hoping maybe the weirdness would make more sense if it was just the two of us. No distractions, no crowd, no overlapping conversations. His house always smelled the same. Old books, lemon cleaner, and that faint pipe tobacco he claimed he quit years ago. When he opened the door, he looked surprised but also relieved in a way I couldn't fully read. We talked about normal stuff at first: weather, his medication, the news he pretended not to watch. But he avoided eye contact more than usual. It made my stomach twist because this was not the man who raised me. Eventually, I brought up the party, hoping he'd open the door to the conversation I couldn't have with anyone else. But as soon as I mentioned it, he stiffened. Not angry, just guarded. He said something vague like, "Memories get tricky when you get older." But that wasn't good enough. Not for what I saw. Not for the photos missing or the stories rewritten. I tried pushing gently, reminding him of moments that were important to both of us. But he just smiled at me with this sad softness, like he was comforting a child who believed in something adults didn't talk about. The more I insisted, the more he drifted back into silence. Not confused silence, intentional silence. Like he was protecting something I wasn't meant to see. By the time I left, I felt more alone in the whole thing than before. The one person who could have grounded me in the truth seemed to be avoiding it on purpose. What freaked me out next happened a few days later when I stopped by my brother Mike's place. We hadn't really talked since the party, and I wanted to see if maybe I could get something out of him without making it a whole confrontation. Mike's always been the golden child, and I'm not saying that bitterly. It's just the truth of our family dynamic. He gets the benefit of the doubt by default. When I sat down with him, he was relaxed at first, talking about work and football like always. But when I casually mentioned the party, I watched the shift happen right in front of me. His shoulders tensed, his jaw tightened slightly, and he took a slow sip of his beer before answering. He kept insisting nothing weird happened, nothing at all. But the way he said it sounded memorized, rehearsed, too smooth to be real. I asked him directly if he remembered I was there for those lake house memories. He shrugged and said, "Dude, it's been years. Stuff blurs." That pissed me off more than I expected, because stuff didn't blur for him. He had always been annoyingly sharp about details. I pushed harder, maybe too hard, asking him about the photo album changes. He looked at me like I was accusing him of something criminal. He kept repeating he had no idea what I meant. But there was this flicker in his eyes, a tiny flash that told me he absolutely knew something. He just wasn't going to say it. At one point during that conversation, I stood up to grab something from the counter, and when I turned back, I noticed Mike had pulled out his phone and was typing something fast. It wasn't normal texting. He kept glancing at me like he didn't want me to see the screen. When he realized I noticed, he locked his phone immediately and switched the topic to something totally unrelated. That's when the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It felt like I had walked into something way bigger than a family misremembering stories. I asked him straight up who he was texting. He said nobody, way too quickly. And that one word, said that way, punched a hole right through any trust one had left. After that, the whole vibe collapsed. He kept pacing and messing with the back of his neck the same way he does when he's hiding something. I asked him again, calmly, if something was going on, if I had done something I didn't know about. He just said no, but it felt like a lie rolling off a conveyor belt. At one point he even said, "You're making this into something it's not," which is what people say when it absolutely is something. The room felt smaller by the minute. I realized he wasn't going to tell me anything, and pushing harder would only make him shut down more. So I left, and the second I closed his door behind me, the same sinking feeling from Grandpa's backyard washed over me. Like the truth was being kept in a room I wasn't allowed to enter anymore. And everyone else had the key. 2 days later, I got a call from my Aunt Linda. She never calls me unless it's for birthdays or holidays, so seeing her name pop up felt strange right away. Her voice sounded softer than usual, almost nervous. She asked how I'd been since the party, but in a way that felt like she was checking my temperature before saying something else. I kept my answer short because I already knew she wasn't calling just to chat. Eventually she said, "I think you're reading too much into things," before I even brought anything up. That made my chest tighten. It proved she already knew what I'd been asking around about. I asked her directly if anyone had mentioned anything to her. She got defensive fast, insisting nobody had talked about me, nobody had said anything. But again, her tone gave her away. There's a crack people get in their voice when they're trying to cover something fragile. She kept saying everyone was just tired that day and that memories get mixed up. Same script as my mom. Same flat reassurance that didn't reassure anything. At one point I asked her if she remembered me being at the lake house that summer. She paused, And that pause told me everything. But instead of acknowledging it, she changed the subject so abruptly I felt the shift physically. She wrapped up the call soon after, claiming she had to check on something in the oven, even though I never heard any kitchen noise. When I hung up, I felt like everyone had gotten some memo about how to talk to me. Something was being hidden, maybe not information, but a version of the past. And I had no idea why I wasn't allowed to have it anymore. A few days later, I decided to go back to my grandpa's house again. I told myself it was just to check on him. But the truth is I wanted to look for the old album myself. The one I remembered, not the one they showed me at the party. His living room was exactly the same, down to the spot on the carpet that had been discolored for at least 10 years. He was napping in his chair, the same way he always did in the afternoons. I didn't want to wake him, so I quietly walked to the cabinet where he kept all his photo albums. There were at least 8 of them, different sizes, different colors. I took them all out and laid them across the table. The leather one from the party was there, looking older and even more worn than I remembered. I opened the first page slowly, expecting the same altered lineup of photos. But the first few pages looked unfamiliar in a different way. Not like they'd been rearranged, but like they belonged to someone else entirely. Pictures from years I wasn't even born yet. Then some from when I was a toddler, but none with me in them. I kept flipping. Page after page, nothing of mine showed up. No fishing trips. No lake house summers. Not a single photo of Grandpa teaching me anything. I felt this cold pressure form at the back of my head, like a migraine trying to break through. I opened another album. Same thing. By the time I reached the 4th one, my hands were trembling so badly I had to put it down. It was like the entire visual record of my childhood had been rewritten in a way I couldn't explain. Right as I was about to reach for the last album, Grandpa woke up. His voice startled me when he said my name. I turned around, and he was watching me with this expression I had never seen from him before, almost scared, but also resigned. I apologized immediately, telling him I was just looking for the old photos. He didn't say anything for a few seconds. He just looked at me like he was letting go of something heavy inside himself. Then he told me to sit. His voice wasn't angry, but it was firm in a way that made me freeze. I sat on the couch across from him, my heart pounding. He kept his hands clasped together, staring at them instead of me. After a long silence, he finally said, "People remember things how they need to remember them. Nothing else, just that." Like it was supposed to explain everything. I asked him what he meant, but he just shook his head. I tried pushing again, mentioning the missing photos, the rewritten stories, how none of it felt accidental. But he wouldn't look at me. He just repeated, "Let it be, Jake." That was the moment I realized he wasn't confused or forgetful at all. He was choosing not to talk. But the scary part was that it felt less like protecting someone and more like protecting something. When I left, he walked me to the door but didn't hug me. And that alone felt like another memory being erased in real time. That night, I dug through my own boxes in the closet, hoping I had copies of the old photos somewhere. I remembered having a few printouts from when I was a kid, things Grandpa had given me himself. I tore through every box, school stuff, old letters, random junk I should have thrown out years ago. But the photos weren't there. Not a single one. I found empty envelopes where I swear pictures used to be. Folders I remembered keeping stuff in were suddenly just filled with loose papers. I even checked my childhood memory box, the one my mom gave me when I moved out. It was mostly baby stuff, drawings, cards, but absolutely no photos of Grandpa and me. I sat on the floor surrounded by empty spaces where parts of my life were supposed to be. It felt unreal. I kept asking myself if I had thrown them away at some point, but I knew I wouldn't have done that. Those moments were important to me. They were the foundation of who I thought I was. And now it felt like someone had vacuumed them out of my life quietly, piece by piece. It didn't feel like bad luck or coincidence anymore. It felt coordinated, even if I couldn't see how. And the thought that the erasing might have started years ago without me noticing made my skin crawl. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I reached out to one of my cousins, the only one I thought might actually tell me something real. She's always been the type who slips up when she's nervous, which made her my best shot. We met at a coffee shop near her apartment, neutral ground. She seemed jumpy from the moment she sat down. I didn't waste time. I asked her if the family had talked about me after the party. She almost dropped her drink. She kept denying everything at first, doing the same dance the others did. But I could see the panic, the way she kept tapping her fingers on the table. When I mentioned the photo albums, she froze. Completely froze. She told me she didn't know anything, but her voice cracked on the word no. Then she said something that stuck with me. Maybe your memories aren't wrong, but maybe theirs aren't either. I asked her what that even meant. She wouldn't explain. She just said she didn't want to get in the middle of it. Middle of what? Nobody was fighting. Nobody had said anything openly hostile. There didn't seem to be a conflict. Just this bizarre revision of reality that nobody wanted to acknowledge. She left in a hurry, saying she had to go even though she had barely touched her drink. I watched her walk away with this sinking certainty that she was terrified of saying the wrong thing. By that point, everything felt like it was closing in on me. Every explanation that made sense logically didn't match the emotional weight of what was happening. If it was just forgetfulness, why were the photos missing too? If it was just coincidence, why did everyone seem so tense whenever I asked questions? And if it wasn't intentional, why did it feel orchestrated? I kept pacing around my apartment, thinking maybe I needed to talk to someone outside the family. A friend, a therapist, anyone. But a part of me was scared to hear what an outsider might say. What if they thought I was losing it? What if I was losing it? But no, memories don't vanish. Photos don't reorganize themselves. Entire families don't suddenly forget a person existed in their shared past. There had to be something I wasn't seeing yet. Some missing piece that tied all the strangeness together. I thought about going back to Grandpa's again, pushing harder, demanding answers. But something about the look he gave me last time made me stop. He wasn't afraid of the truth. He was afraid of me finding it. That realization hit me in a way I can't fully explain. It made the whole thing feel bigger than him, bigger than all of them. Like the silence wasn't just a choice, it was a boundary, one I wasn't supposed to cross. A week after all of this, I got a voicemail from Grandpa. It was short, barely 10 seconds. He said he wanted to see me and that it was important. There was something in his voice I couldn't place, almost like urgency mixed with regret. I drove to his house immediately, my heart pounding the whole way. When I pulled up, all the blinds were shut, which wasn't normal for him. I knocked, rang the bell, waited, knocked again. No answer. His car was in the driveway, so I knew he had to be home. I tried calling him right from the porch, and I heard the phone ringing faintly inside. That sound sent chills through me. It confirmed he was there. After a long minute, the door finally opened just a crack. It was Grandpa, but he looked different, tired in a way I'd never seen. He didn't open the door all the way. He kept one hand braced against the frame like he was blocking the entrance. I asked him if everything was okay, if he needed help. He shook his head with a tiny motion, barely moving. Then he said something that didn't make sense. Some things are safer forgotten. I asked him what that meant, but he just whispered, "Go home," and closed the door. It clicked shut so gently it felt more final than if he had slammed it. I stood there staring at the wood grain, listening to my own pulse in my ears. For the first time, I felt genuinely scared, not of him, but of whatever he was afraid of. And the worst part was that I walked back to my car without knocking again. That night, something strange happened that I still can't explain. I woke up around 3 a.m. with this sudden urge to check my phone. No notifications, no missed calls, nothing. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It was this heavy pressure in my chest, like someone was trying to tell me something without using words. I got up, walked around my apartment, tried to shake it off. But every room felt wrong, like the air was thicker than usual. I kept thinking of Grandpa standing behind that cracked door, his face half in the dark. Some things are safer forgotten. The sentence kept looping in my head like a warning. I don't know what pushed me to do it, but I grabbed my keys and drove straight to his house. The streets were empty, the kind of empty that makes every sound echo inside your own skull. When I pulled up, the house was dark except for one light in the living room. I walked to the window and looked in, expecting to see him in his chair. But he wasn't there. The chair was empty, slightly angled like someone had stood up in a hurry. I knocked on the door, soft at first, then louder. No answer. I tried calling again, no answer. That was the moment the fear fully settled in. Not panic, not dread, just this cold certainty that something had shifted again, and not in a way I could undo. The next morning, my mom called me sounding frantic. She said Grandpa had been taken to the hospital overnight. Apparently, one of the neighbors saw him wandering outside alone and confused. But that didn't make sense. He had been perfectly lucid the day before. And the neighbor claimed he kept repeating something under his breath, something they couldn't quite make out. When I got to the hospital, my family was already gathered there. Mike was pacing. My aunt was crying. My mom kept wringing her hands like she was trying to squeeze the truth out of them. They all got quiet the moment I approached. Not sad quiet, tense quiet. I asked what happened, and nobody looked me in the eye. Eventually, the doctor came out and explained that Grandpa had suffered some kind of sudden neurological event. He wasn't unconscious, but he was barely speaking. When we were finally allowed to see him, he looked small in that hospital bed, like everything he'd been holding on to had drained out of him overnight. I reached for his hand, and he squeezed mine. Weak, but intentional. His eyes opened just a little, unfocused but searching. I leaned closer, hoping he'd say something, anything. His lips moved, but the word that came out was so quiet I almost missed it. Remember. Then his grip loosened, and he drifted back into a stillness that didn't feel natural. After that day, things only got stranger. My family slowly started acting like nothing unusual had happened at the party. Every time I brought it up, they brushed past it or changed the subject. My mom even told me I was making Grandpa's last days harder by obsessing. But I wasn't obsessing. I was trying to understand why the man who had been my best friend growing up was suddenly trapped behind layers of silence, both his and theirs. I visited him every day at the hospital. Most days he barely responded, but every once in a while, he'd look at me with this flicker of recognition that felt like he was trying to tell me something I wasn't meant to miss. The rest of the family rarely stayed long when I was there. It was like my presence made them uncomfortable in a way I couldn't understand. One afternoon, I walked into his room and found my mom closing a drawer by his bedside. When she saw me, she jumped slightly, like she'd been caught. I asked what she was doing, and she said she was just organizing. But something about her body language told me it was more than that. When she left the room, I opened the drawer. It was completely empty. Not even hospital supplies inside. Just an empty drawer. And for some reason, that emptiness felt intentional, like it was hiding the fact something had been there a moment before. I sat down in the chair next to Grandpa and felt this sinking disbelief settle in my chest again. No matter where I looked, reality seemed to be rearranging itself around me. Grandpa passed away 2 days later. The funeral was quiet, almost muted. Nobody talked about memories or stories this time. They kept things generic, safe, shallow, like they were afraid of saying the wrong thing. After the burial, people gathered back at my mom's house. Everyone ate, talked, laughed in small bursts. But nobody mentioned me and Grandpa, not once. Not a single story, not a single photo, not the years we spent together. It was like the party all over again, but colder. I asked Mike if we could at least find the old albums and put one picture of Grandpa with each of us on display. He said, "We don't have any photos like that." And everyone else nodded. Every single one of them. I felt something break inside of me. Not anger, not sadness, just this hollow understanding that whatever they were all doing, it wasn't going to stop. Later that night, after everyone left, I walked out to my car feeling like I was stepping out of a life that didn't fit me anymore. Before I got in, I looked back at the house. All the lights were on, shadows moving in the windows, voices murmuring softly. Then, for just a second, I thought I saw Grandpa's silhouette in the doorway. Not real, not solid, more like a flash of memory slipping through. I blinked and it was gone. And that was the moment I realized something unsettling. I don't know which version of my life is real anymore. And whatever happened that day at his birthday, whatever started shifting, never shifted back.